Hello and welcome to Real Talk on Renal Cancer, sponsored by the Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation. I'm so excited to have with me today Laura Bumbaco, who is a registered dietitian. She'll be talking to us about all things nutrition and some great tips for kidney cancer caregivers, survivors, warriors. And I also just want to briefly give a shout out to our amazing sponsors. So this podcast is sponsored by Merck, Exelixis, and Ipsen. So, Lori, welcome to Real Talk on Renal Cancer. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I know that you have been with us at the Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation for quite some time. You have your amazing nutrition Mythbusters series that you do for us, and I just wanted to kind of find out a little bit more about what got you interested in Judy Nicholson and kidney cancer specifically, and kind of how you started with doing these amazing series for us.
Thank you. I surprise a lot of people when I share that I've been in practice for 20 years. I think I surprised myself.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
It's a long time. And I originally went to school I was thinking I was going to study physical therapy. I always had an interest in helping people and in medicine and health. And I volunteered for a physical therapist one summer. And boy, oh boy, did I realize it was not for me. And I absolutely give all my respect and credit to physical therapists because I think they lend such valuable expertise to the interdisciplinary team, definitely for the individuals I work with. But I realized it wasn't for me. And so I was at school, and it was a very small school, and I didn't want to transfer out. So my undergrad is actually in public health. So I sort of have this like foundation of, I think it's sort of like this desire to make, good care accessible to all, and I feel like that translates very nicely to what I do today. But I remember distinctly sitting in a class. It was like a lifestyle and chronic disease prevention class. And I distinctly remember like looking at these charts in the textbook and seeing how diet plays a role in a lot of our chronic diseases, including cancer. And so it just like jumped out off the page at me. And I was like, I think there's something to this like diet and nutrition thing. So I was meeting with my preceptor counselor at the time, and she's like, well, the experts are dietitians, so you probably need to be a dietitian. So I said, okay, I guess that's next. And then so I did all of my nutrition coursework. And then to become a dietitian, you have to fulfill those requirements, and then you have to apply and be accepted into an accredited internship, which is basically like 9 months unpaid labor. And then once you do that, then you can sit for the exam to become a registered dietitian. And probably like half of all the candidates that start that process make it through to the end. Yeah, I know. I like to share that because the term dietitian, I don't know if it's well understood. And there are other practitioners out there that are nutritionists that may not necessarily be dietitians. And so really anyone can technically call themselves a nutritionist and not really have like the level of education or training that a dietitian would have. But during my internship, I knew oncology was it. It was just something that I think most oncology providers feel, it's just something you can't deny.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, okay, is there a specialist in oncology nutrition? Because I think that's what's next. I think I'm like a perpetual student. And I'll get into that in a moment too. But so then I realized there is. And so I'm board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition. And so that requires like 2,000 hours of practice. So I had to be as a dietitian, like working with oncology patients, which I did. When I first started working, there was no such thing as like outpatient treatment centers. A lot of the chemo was given inpatient. So I got all my hours, and then I sat for my boards, and I passed. And every 5 years, I sit for the boards because the world of oncology, as we all know, is so rapidly evolving. right? Thank goodness. And so I have to stay up to date on all that, all the new drugs, all of that stuff, right?
Always. Right. And to your point, I mean, 20 years ago, chemo and radiation were really all that we had, right? And these newer drugs, and I think most of our listeners probably are aware that for most types of kidney cancer, not all, but most, chemo and radiation don't typically work for us, or traditional radiation, I should say, because SBRT is a whole other ball of wax. But the side effects of these, targeted therapy and immunotherapy are very different in many ways than what chemo and radiation do, right? So yeah, it's important for you to stay up to date. I completely understand why.
Yeah. And it's really so rewarding to see all the advancements and to know that there's options and
Right.
to really understand oncology care as I understand nutrition care is that it's so individualized, right? So even if you're diagnosed with this, maybe the same kidney cancer, you might have a different treatment plan.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So same goes with diet. When I do a nutrition assessment with someone, there is never another assessment that's going to be the same. They're all
Right.
unique.
Right.
And I think that's what, as a dietitian, is also what we bring to the table, because a lot of the nutrition information out there, even if it's given from an oncology provider who's not a dietitian, it's probably well intentioned. There's probably some good information there, but it might not be as unique and specific as that person might benefit from.
I really appreciate that you said that, because that actually, I think you kind of answered my question before I asked it, which I love. It's okay. Because I was going to ask, I know many patients, myself included, when we're first diagnosed, there's so much happening, right? There's so much happening. Your world's been turned upside down. You're just trying to process the diagnosis and learn about an organ that you probably have not given much thought to before this point in time, right? I know I didn't. I knew I had kidneys, but didn't really think about what my kidneys were doing for me until I was diagnosed, right? And that's pretty common. And so, I think that I'm really grateful that my oncologist pretty early on did refer me to a dietitian after my nephrectomy and all. But for patients that are kind of curious and going, well, look, I'm already spending so many copays, seeing so many doctors and specialists. I'm overwhelmed. I'm having a hard time figuring out what to prioritize. Why should I seek out a dietitian? And you kind of answer that maybe, but maybe you have something else to add to that would be great.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that, because I agree. That's definitely my experience as well.
Mhm.
And I would say I feel very passionate that everyone diagnosed with a cancer, no matter what the cancer type is, should meet with a dietitian, and preferably an oncology certified dietitian, because of the fact that we all eat, and we all eat for different reasons. And because there's great evidence that if we are eating well enough to support ourselves during treatment, then we're going to help the treatment do the best job possible. So nutrition sort of lends like this complementary role, right? We never talk about how it's an alternative to treatment, but it really helps support the body as it's going through all these treatments, whether it be surgery, targeted therapy, or beyond. So I think the evidence is there. Um, I'm also pretty passionate that centers. I do work in a lot of different. wear a lot of different professional hats, and I think that most treatment centers should have a dietitian literally in the building, to make that team as an interdisciplinary team as well-rounded as possible. And I think also too, when you have a dietitian on the interdisciplinary team, it allows every other professional to do their job and not waste time, asking the great questions that people ask, like, what should I eat? What should I not eat? Should I take this supplement? I heard I shouldn't eat this, or this causes cancer. What do I do? Dietitians can really help navigate all of that information in meaningful ways for people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You can speak to a dietitian and have kind of relieve that time in your meeting with your oncologist for other things you need to
Mhm.
discuss, right? That's an excellent point. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. You know, I think we talked previously about some of the things that a lot of patients hear. I know, again, I heard this whenever I was diagnosed, right? You should eat this. Eat this salad was actually one of them. It was somebody gave me a salad recipe with like super greens. It was like, you need to eat this 3 times a day. And actually, it was kind of not really funny, but I'm sharing this because I'm sure there's a patient out there that can relate to this. So I wasn't really a salad eater when I first like was diagnosed. And I thought that it would be a good idea to blend it.
Oh,
And, my poor family is sitting there like, please drink this smoothie. Like, please drink it. Please, it's gonna help you. And I'm like, I would honestly rather die than finish this. Like it was so terrible, right?
right.
So I share this because I'm sure I'm not the only patient who's been through an experience like that, right? And what I'm trying to convey in a humorous way is, you do feel so much pressure, especially after a diagnosis, like a kidney cancer diagnosis, that, oh my gosh, okay, did what I've eaten before contribute to my diagnosis? And now I have to be careful about every single thing that I put into my body because I don't want to make things worse, right? And that's a lot of guilt and burden for a patient to carry. How
Too
do you kind
much.
of right? How do you kind of
Yeah.
talk patients through that?
Really good question. Thank you. I think I would say the majority of my time spent with patients is first just being a good listener and understanding, who I'm working with because because someone might not necessarily be ready to go there. They're just sort of still in that state of distress, a real high level of distress. And that's why a lot of social workers are on this interdisciplinary team too, to help someone kind of cope with that initial diagnosis. And I mean, my philosophy is that I'm here to be someone who gives information. I won't tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do. I don't like to have that responsibility. But my job is to help someone make the best decision possible for themselves because I know that, food is a lot of different things to different people. And we don't I think like having any shame or guilt around eating or not eating something is actually worse for somebody, emotionally, than ever eating anything could ever possibly be. Right. So to make that pretty clear with the people I work with, and then also to build rapport with them and to gain their trust, that I'm here to really protect them from harm. They understand almost right away how passionate I am, that they get high level trustworthy information, and that although there's wealth, an overwhelming amount of information out there, that I can help them sort of quiet down that extra noise and help really focus in on what's most important for them. And then we kind of go from there. And that's usually pretty successful from my experience.
I love that. And you're right. I think that I've been a patient and a caregiver, and I think that's something that's important for not just the care team, but also caregivers think about whenever they're talking with their patients, right? Is listening to their patients, listen
Yeah.
to what is important to them. I wanted to ask you, I know that again, you have this amazing series called Nutrition Mythbusters that's on YouTube, thanks to the Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation. I really enjoyed watching the episodes, and so I encourage our listeners to go take a look at that and see all the things that Lori's doing for us in that realm. But I wanted to ask you, what's one, whether it's one that you've covered already, hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder, so maybe you have planned for the future, but what are some nutrition, like what's one Mythbuster that you feel like it was the most aha moment for most people where they go, really? I didn't know that.
Oh gosh. Okay, that's a great question. A few come to mind.
I'm sure
I
you
I
you
think
don't have to limit it to one, you can.
I think for a lot of people, they worry about sugar and that sugar feeds cancer. And that's not really true. And it's a lot more complicated than that very simplistic statement. So again, I have to sort of know the person I'm working with, and if they're worried about that, how to help them navigate that information in meaningful ways. But they don't need to be afraid to eat sugar. It doesn't cause cancer. And if we stop eating sugar, it doesn't cure our cancer. If it did, we would be telling people, don't eat sugar, but it's unfortunately not the case. Dietary supplements, I think, come up often as well. And I think there's this conception or misconception that, there's sort of natural and safe, and maybe there's something that someone believes in highly and they've been taking them for years. And so when they're diagnosed, they like fail to mention it to their treatment team. So I think sometimes that's an important one to point out to individuals, that your care team should just know and be aware of any supplements that you're taking, because sometimes the dose is the poison. And sometimes there might be some interaction just based on the treatment type. So that one's a surprise to people, that there's no good information that, just like sugar, that dietary supplements can cure cancer.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Sugar was a very common one. I still hear that one sometimes, from people even 8 years out almost, they go, really, you're gonna eat that? And I'm like, yes, I'm gonna eat that,
Yeah, it's not fair. It's like you're
Even
being
things like
judged.
fruit, right? And sometimes even things like fruit, right? I literally had a friend say, fruit's sugar, right? And I was like,
Oh.
would you rather me eat a massive candy bar? Like,
I don't get it, right?
right?
Yeah,
So, but I do understand, and I feel like, and what I mean by understand is I understand, especially newly diagnosed patients, right? That you're just grasping for everything, right? You're grasping for anything and everything you could possibly do to help yourself, which is an important self-advocacy skill to have, right? Like, obviously you don't want to be binging on like alcohol or drugs while you're going through it, right? That wouldn't be good. But, I do always say, especially, I know whenever I was going through treatment, my appetite was often really suppressed, right? Whether I just didn't feel like eating or I was so nauseous, from the treatment that I didn't feel, nothing sounded good, right? And so you kind of get into this mode of like, well, if I can only eat healthy food, which may not be as appealing to me to eat, right? But then I'm getting to an unhealthy weight because I'm losing so much weight because I'm not eating, right? It's this catch-22. And um, I think some patients are really hesitant to go ahead and just eat something just to have some calories coming in. What do you say to patients like that whenever you encounter them?
another great question. You are full of them.
Thank
I
you.
love it.
I
Yeah,
appreciate
and
that.
imagine like we eat as a behavior, right? So like a behavior is something that's usually automatic, like we're not really thinking about it. So when someone's on treatment and they're not physically feeling like they can eat like normal, I cannot imagine how that must be, because I think we take for granted, like we just eat, it tastes right, we digest it normal and no issues, right? But when all of that gets flipped around, it can really be a struggle for people. And also too, I think like of some of the individuals I work with who are like elderly and who have been eating a certain way their whole life, or maybe told by their doctors because they might have some comorbid conditions that they shouldn't be eating certain foods. And that sticks in our head. We pick up these things somewhere along the way. And so it's again a case by case, assessment that we're going to make recommendations, but sometimes that is an aha moment for people to learn that, we can make some switches that are going to be temporary, because the idea is that we're just going to satisfy the priority, which is to get someone through treatment. And we don't have any information at this point in time that it matters. And I can't believe I'm saying this as a dietitian, but it is the truth. We just know it's the calories. If you maintain your weight, then chances are you're going to be able to get your treatment and be able to finish it. And that's all the oncology care team wants, right? And so it might not matter if it's high quality calories, if it's like the plant-based diet versus, a highly processed diet. We don't know. So a little bit of reassurance is needed there for me. And we talk a little bit more about like how someone might be eating before they're diagnosed and how they've done a great job to kind of set their body up for having this like storage of great nutrients that are there, because our bodies have a remarkable capacity to do that. And that I'm there to hold their hand, so how someone might be feeling during a cycle or during a certain point in time during their treatment might not be how they feel throughout. And so I think that's important to do. And again, I'm a big advocate, and I heard you say this about self-advocacy. We don't want anyone to suffer on treatment, so we really look into like maximizing symptom management. I know I do that in practice, if it means that someone can eat more closely to the way that they prefer.
Yeah, I love that. And, don't worry, we will put the disclaimer here that Lori is not saying that you can just eat whatever you want, right? Right. But I appreciate that there's a lot of nuances there, right? And one thing that maybe, I hear this, as particularly with patients that do TKIs or target therapy drugs, like what I did. So sometimes referred to as oral chemo, all that's a little bit of a misnomer. But one thing that I experienced, and I know is kind of common, is for a while there, everything that I ate either tasted really metallic or tasted really salty. And then that would like really send me into panic because, of course, I was trying to watch my salt intake because I only have one kidney now, right? So, and it wasn't that the food was actually metallic or salty, it was my taste buds had changed being on the treatment. So are there some things that a patient like me could have done during that time, right, or could do now, whenever you're having those side effects from treatment to help, still eat, or maybe kind of trick your taste buds into not getting that? Because I'm telling you, it was like at one point I tried describing it to my grandparents as, it felt like I was eating everything, like I was biting into like a metallic, salty spoon.
Oh, yeah. I can't
Terrible.
imagine. Oh,
It's not great.
yeah.
It's not
No.
great.
No wonder why you wouldn't want to eat, right?
No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, so that's not uncommon for taste changes to happen. And here we really get into the specifics of how unique someone is, right? Because everyone's taste perception is unique, and our sense of smell is also tied in pretty intimately to how we perceive taste. So I explore a lot of that with the people I work with. One strategy I find is helpful is we talk about anything that does sort of have like a somewhat normal taste. And it might be like just reflecting back on the week, like what worked, like what was one thing that stood out. And it might not be really like a great experience. It tasted great, but at least they were able to manage it. And then we have the food, right? So there's something about it. So maybe it was something like lemon, which very often is recommended for metallic taste. I've had patients, I had a great example of a patient who his wife made like a baked like lemon chicken, and on accident, like added more lemon than she normally does. And he was like, and they were talking about it together in the room, and and he was like, yeah, that actually kind of tasted good. And she's like, well, I made it wrong. I didn't make it the right way. And I was like, this is a great accident to have happen, because ta-da, now we know that the lemon is the vehicle to help someone eat a more well-rounded, balanced diet. And could we apply that lemon like across the board? Lemon just so happens to work pretty well with a lot of different foods, so that it can enhance the flavor of the food, or at least help them kind of manage being able to taste it and get through it a little bit better. Sometimes if people have like a little sensitivity to the acid, we'll even talk about zesting the outside of the lemon into some of their meals. But that's just one example. I mean, I have like a novel of all the different examples of how people have found something. There's something. And then that again is like the vehicle to help them through it. I don't know if you can tell on the shelves behind me, we have lemon heads. And there's a local organization near where I am that gives out these like boxes of lemon flavored candy. And the idea is that it might help some individuals that have that metallic taste. We also take food out of metal, and take metal out of the mouth. So it might be about using like looking towards away from like canned products towards more frozen or boxed products. We suggest like plasticware or like bamboo utensils or like baby coated utensils. I've had patients use chopsticks because they were pretty good, adept at using them. I know I'm terrible.
Yeah, if I had to feed myself on chopsticks, I would be dead, honestly, probably. Like that's a skill that I admire that I do not have personally.
Yeah, but imagine the people that, live to eat, and all
Right,
of a sudden their favorite foods are not
right,
enjoyable. Yeah, so we
exactly.
talk about actually avoiding their favorites
Hmm.
because they might develop a permanent aversion. And
Right.
that's like a gift I feel like I give some people, because this is why I like oncology nutrition. I think there's a quality of life aspect to eating and to food. And then that's where caregivers also come into play, because they are trying so hard and they're feeling helpless, and they want to help, but some of the things they make, like their favorite dishes, they're not successful, so we talk about how normal that is,
Mhm.
and that it's okay, that there are some solutions, and so we work together really like as a team to get through that time.
That I love that. It's really important. Actually, I was recently at an oncology conference, and some survivors and I were talking about the foods that we don't eat anymore because it
Oh,
triggers unpleasant memories,
yeah.
or things that, it's like, oh gosh, I used to eat that every time I go for an infusion, and now I can't stand the sight and smell of it, right? And unfortunately, that happens. So I love that you kind of prep patients in advance, right? Maybe avoid those foods. You don't eat that so that you don't, it's not something that you're burned out on, or you just kind of tied to that trauma later on.
Yeah.
Um, are there other things that maybe for patients that are going through treatment, right? I know nausea and vomiting is a real issue for a lot of us. I know I used to like carry ginger tablets with me that would help sometimes. There are other things like that that we can do as patients, or caregivers that are preparing food for their loved ones, right? Things that can help with just overcoming that nausea and that feeling of not wanting to eat.
Yeah, great question. So I do find most of the individuals I work with are told by, like, upfront, like at their teach for their treatment, that they are advised to eat small frequent meals. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that for everybody, but I think it works really well to help manage that queasiness, like that unsettled stomach feeling that sometimes people can't quite describe as nausea. They're not like feeling like they're going to get sick, but they just don't really want to eat. And I hear some people describe it that way. So that's why I have to be a good listener, because some people I work with eat maybe one meal a day. So we're not going to expect them to eat 6 small meals a day. We're going to have to probably negotiate and compromise, like how can we go from one meal to more than one meal? And I find that many individuals I work with, if they don't let their stomach go empty, it helps to kind of settle and quiet down that stomach. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. So we come up with examples for snacks that are portable and easy and maybe nutritious, and fit the bill in terms of their taste. Usually things that are non-perishable, um, because I do think that similar to taste changes, I think if someone's having nausea, their sense of smell may be triggering them. So we troubleshoot with that. And this was another cancer type, but I had a patient with lung cancer who, on the way to the kitchen, she would get sick, and she realized finally that it was the fireplace that was triggering her nausea. So by the time she was in the kitchen, she didn't want to eat. So she just stayed away. And we ventilated the room when the weather was appropriate, or caregivers brought the food to them. I have a lot of patients that do takeout for that reason, because the thought of it or the smell of the food as it's being prepared is what really sets them up to have an unsuccessful meal. And so it's almost like in an instant, when someone's hungry, there it is in front of their face. And then they have probably a better opportunity to be able to tolerate that. And those are some strategies that, I think ginger is a great idea too. But those seem to be pretty successful with the people I work with.
I love those. And Lori, I know we're getting close to time, but I did want to just ask you one last question. Our caregivers, I know our caregivers spend so much time thinking about us and how they can help us, and how to be the support that we need them to be, but they don't always take care of themselves. Are there some
Yeah.
nutrition tips or tricks that you have for our caregivers? I know I don't operate well whenever I'm hangry, and I'm sure a lot of other either, right? So
Same.
so what are some things that caregivers can do to make sure that they're also taking care of their bodies and their health through nutrition?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question too. We need the whole team to be able to support our patients, right? So yes, I very often will take caregivers aside if they're looking exhausted, and sometimes even just listening is, so I would encourage caregivers to be able to speak about what they're feeling and how they're coping with what they're feeling, which is not nutrition related, but I think that ability to be able to kind of process through some of their emotions is really an important part of the process for them. Um, but yes, absolutely. I think that, I have some caregivers that complain they're gaining weight because they're making all these different foods for patients and it's not necessarily what they need. So we talk about that and I validate that. Okay, it sounds like you don't want to gain weight. So let's talk about some strategies that you could maybe do. And a lot of it is meal planning and meal prep. And I have a lot of patients who have extended family members or neighbors or members of the church that want to prepare meals. And very often I suggest they do that for maybe the children of the home or the patient so that or for the caregiver so that it's like less responsibility. It allows them to kind of delegate that for themselves. But absolutely to try to get into routine where there's some sleep, whether it be the duration of the sleep and the quality of the sleep, and some really great coping techniques for stress reduction, whatever that might be. Is it walking in nature? Is it meditation? And could they maybe do this with the patient as part of like a healing process together? And then also too, I think keeping in mind like the role of that nutrition and food play in our lives. Food is nourishment. We need to eat, we need it for sustenance, but it's also pleasure. And I think that many of the people I work with lose that pleasure of eating, and caregivers can certainly put a lot of extra pressure and stress upon themselves to make like the perfect meal for patients. But if we can sort of find a balance of the nutrition and the pleasure and the connection that food brings to our lives, then ultimately we're really, I think, doing the best we can with food.
Wow, Lori, I almost want to just end things right there. That was incredible. And again, I think it's a great, I think it's a great reminder to both patients and caregivers, right? Um, we spend so much time thinking about the food that we're putting into our body, which is important whenever you're going through treatment or preparing for surgery or post-surgery, because it can impact, how you're feeling and your overall well-being. But sometimes that becomes a chore. And so I think it's really a good reminder that food can still be pleasure for us and that sometimes it's okay to, eat something just that bowl of ice cream.
Indulge.
Probably not
Yeah.
make or break you. I don't have a bowl of ice cream every night, right? But that won't make or break you. So I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you'd like for our listeners to know or keep in mind? Any last thoughts or maybe resources for them to think about moving forward?
I think it's so wonderful what Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation offers. I think that every patient I know, I refer them to the website to check out all of the educational resources that are available, especially for caregivers that are looking for more information. I find that it seems like they're the ones especially that are interested to visit the website. And the YouTube channel is full of content, whether it be my videos or Jenny Spencer with her activity and exercise ideas. I think there's just so much to explore there, and we're all about disseminating trustworthy but up to date information. And I think that is what that's ultimately what I want every patient I work with to have. So yeah, so I would say please check out those resources. It's so amazing.
I couldn't agree more. And you're absolutely right. Even though we're told not to Google, we all do as patients and caregivers, right? And so, but it's important to find accurate, evidence-based information. And like you, I really appreciate that Judy Nicholson provides that for patients and caregivers. It's a great resource when there's a lot of noise out there. So,
Absolutely.
so I couldn't agree more. Well, Lori, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I've learned a lot that I'm going to implement in my own life, and I know our listeners will too. So I really appreciate your time today. Again, Laura Bumbaco is our registered dietitian with us at the Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation, and really appreciate your time today, Lori. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. It's such a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Well, thank you guys. This has been another great episode of the Real Talk on Renal Cancer from the Judy Nicholson Kidney Cancer Foundation, and we will see you all next month. Thank you.